Hi guys, I'm Emily from the Blue Mouse, and today I have another free pattern for you. And this one is a little bit less structured than my typical patterns are. So typically I tell you a step-by-step instruction, and this is just more of a recipe than it is a pattern. Here I have a couple examples. And they're just little pouches, so they could be big like this and they could be a clutch, or they could be smaller like this one and be more of like a notions pouch. And you can add buttons or fringe or whatever you want to personalize it. You can make it one color, two color. You can make it in pretty much any stitch pattern you want. I would advise against a lace stitch pattern because if you're trying to hold anything inside, it's not going to stay inside with the lace. Alright, so here is one of the finished ones that I have, and actually I've made this top flap here just a little bit too short, so that's just kind of a lesson in what not to do. So I've improved it with the larger one. So essentially what you're going to do is make a really long piece of knit fabric. So you're going to pick a yarn and pick a pair of corresponding needles. So I used Yarnspiration's Bernat Maker Home Deck, which is a perfect yarn to use for a clutch. And I used a pair of US 11 knitting needles to go with it. But again, you can use any yarn and pair of corresponding needles to go with it. It is your pattern, do what you want with it. And knit up basically a giant swatch. So you want to pick the width that you want. So here I've got about a 9-inch width. So I cast on the amount of stitches in Moss Stitch, which is the pattern that I used, to get 9 inches. So I cast on that many stitches, and then you just work in whatever pattern you want to. So I picked Moss Stitch, and I actually did a slip stitch selvage edge, which I have a video on that I'll link below, but I would advise doing that on the edge of whatever pattern you've chosen, just to make seaming in the end a lot easier. So I actually haven't seamed this piece together yet. I've pinned it on 3 different spots so that I knew how long I wanted the top piece to be. So essentially what you're doing is you're making one really long piece. So here I've made one really long piece, and then I've folded up the bottom to get the right size for the pocket that I want. So this is the size of the pocket that I want. So once you've knit until you've gotten that amount of length, so I've got probably about 4.5 inches here. So once I had 9 inches total, so I could fold it over and get about 4.5, and you could pick whatever depth you want. So however deep you want your pocket to be, that is what you want to go for. So remember, you want to double it. So if you want a 5-inch deep pocket, then you want to work at least 10 inches. Because when you fold it over, it's going to cut that length in half, and the fold, depending on how chunky the yarn you're using, will take a little bit of length as well. So I would advise going up maybe 1/2 inch, maybe even an extra inch of length to compensate for that. So once you've got your fold done, you need to keep knitting until you get the cover flap. So this is really easy to gauge. I would just pin your project like I have here, so I know this is how deep I want my pocket to be. So I pinned it on the edges and I pinned it in the middle. So you can see that I have a pocket here and that it is ready to go. And then I just kept that on my needles and kept knitting until I had the correct size flap that I want. So you want to make sure that you can easily fold it over and that there's enough room with that fold. So you can tell here that I did not make it long enough because when I fold it over, it doesn't quite come down to the bottom here. Now, if I had done a buttonhole on this flap and added a button here, then it would stay nice and easily. But because I didn't do that, this is too short and it flips open. So that's not very helpful. But for this one, I made sure to make the fold over flap plenty long so that it rests and lays flat. Now again, this is much more of a recipe than it is a pattern. You can personalize it for whatever you want. So you could do it in stockinette, you could do it in herringbone, you could do it in any kind of rib or cedar moss stitch, anything you want. Pick your favorite stitch and you could add multiple colors, like whatever you want to do, get creative with it. You could add fringe here on the bind off edge, or you could add fringe at the end to the bottom of your clutch or your bag. You could buy a piece of leather and add a handle here, or you could do a buttonhole on this close over flap and then add a button down here so that it stays closed. It's whatever you want. This is just more of a general concept for you to follow. I'll have some basic written instructions on my blog if you want more of a better guideline for it. So when you have the length that you want and you make sure that the fold over flap is a nice size, then you have to seam the sides closed so that you actually have a pocket. So go ahead and clip where you want to be. I would clip them the same on each, and if you did use a slip stitch selvage edge, then you can kind of line up your edges and you can count the slip stitches. But you could also just do it by measuring length, whatever you want. And I have a video on how to do a mattress seam, but I'm going to show you how to do that today using a slip stitch edge, even though the same concept applies if you have a normal edge. So we're just going to do that real fast. So go ahead and take your yarn. Now you'll want to use the same color yarn that you used for your project, but here I'm using a contrasting color just to help you guys out. So you're going to have one stitch that is part of the fold, and that is that stitch down here. And then you have all these stitches that line up with each other. So what I like to do is I like to come from the top down through the stitch that is your fold and pull until you have a tail. So now I have a tail, and I'm just going to stick that tail in between my two pieces. And now I'm going to look at the right side. And if you pull the slip stitch away from the edge, you'll see that there are two bars here. So these two bars here, you're going to go under them with your needle, going up and pull the yarn underneath. Be careful not to pull too tight or you'll pull your tail out. And then go to the same corresponding stitch on your left side, which is this one, and you're going to pull it away from your edge, and you get two bars there as well. So go underneath those two bars and move in the same direction, so you're moving up. And then pull that yarn through, again being careful not to pull your tail out. And then you move back to the other side and go underneath the two bars of the next stitch. And then move back to the other side and go under the next two bars of the stitch next to the one you just worked on the left side. So you're just moving from side to side and moving a stitch up each time. So the next two bars on the right side, and then the next two bars on the left side, and then the next two bars on the right side, next two bars on the left side. And you just keep doing that all the way up until you have fully seamed your length. All right, so now I have my full seam. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull it closed, but what you want to do is grab onto the tail so that that doesn't go anywhere, and then pull it tight. So pull on the working tail that's attached to your needle, and pull until you start to feel tension on the tail. And that's when you need to stop. All right, so now I'm feeling tension in the tail, and it's all bunched up. So what you do is you just kind of pull it apart. So you're pulling the bottom and the top away from each other. And there you have your seam. See how I've seamed that closed? And then there's no noticeable seam on the outside, but if you do flip it inside, you get kind of a ridge here. And that's actually good because you can weave in your ends in that ridge very easily. So just go ahead and weave in your ends on that side, and then we're going to go over and do that same seaming technique for the other side. All right, so now go over to the other side, and you're going to do the exact same thing on this end, and then both of your edges will be attached and you will have a pocket. And that's really just it, guys. It's very simple. This is just kind of a basic guideline. It's not a fully developed pattern for you, but it just kind of gives you the inspiration to create something like this for yourself and put your own twist on it. So thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe for more videos. And I also have a bi-weekly podcast, so you can subscribe and watch the 4 episodes that are up already, and one will be coming out next week as well.